It was growing dark when Mr. Banks, coming along the lane, glanced at Binnacle's front window and beheld a curious sight. In a small room, clean and bare as the deck of a ship, sat Miss Andrew in the only chair, looking like somebody who has been shipwrecked. An empty glass stood on a table nearby, and beside her, squatting on his haunches, was Binnacle. Absorbed in something, she was reading aloud, an activity that, from the look on her face, filled her with rage and disgust. And in the doorway, intently listening, was no less a person than the Prime Minister, the head of state in Cherry Tree Lane, concerning himself with the goings-on in the home of an ex-pirate. Amazed, Mr. Banks took off his hat. "Can I be of service, Prime Minister? Is anything amiss?" "No, Banks, my dear fellow, such tribulations. The lady whom you see inside has vacated number 18 because her companion, a cook and a chemist, I'm not sure, which, has apparently deserted her. And Binnacle, the Admiral's servant, has taken her to live with him on two important conditions. One, that she dance the sailor's hornpipe, and the other, that she read to him. Well, she has danced, though unwillingly, and now she is reading aloud." "I am flabbergasted," said Mr. Banks. "Miss Andrew dancing? Looty gone? I think you should know, Prime Minister, that companion was neither a cook nor a chemist, but a boy hardly taller than my daughter Jane, who was brought by Miss Andrew from the South Seas. A child! Good heavens, we must get the police. A lost boy must be searched for." "I wouldn't advise it, Prime Minister. The police might frighten him. Give him just a little more time. He's a bright lad. He will find his way." "Well, if you think so. You know them better than I." "I do, indeed. Miss Andrew was once my governess, and she's known as the Holy Terror. The boy has had a lucky escape." "Ha! Well, it's Binnacle who's the Holy Terror now. It's Binnacle now who's the Holy Terror. He has given her cold porridge to eat, made her drink various medicines mixed together in a single glass, and he won't let her read to him anything but copies, new or old, of Fizzo." "Fizzo? But that's a comic, surely." "And Miss Andrew is a learnt woman. Having read comics aloud will simply horrify her. Perhaps it will even drive her mad." "Well, I happen to like them, Banks. I get so weary of making the laws that I find Fizzo quite restful. We have just had Tiger Tim and the Tortoise, and now we are in the middle of Sam's adventure. So excuse me, please, my dear fellow. I must hear how he and Gwendolen managed to deal with the dragon." "Of course," said Mr. Banks politely, and leaving the Prime Minister craning his head to catch the story, he hurried home, full of the evening's news. Number 18, as he passed it, had something of its old friendly look, and Miss Lark's dogs were busily sniffing at something under the hedge. They could smell the old bones they had given Looty, and since he seemed to have gone away, they were anxious to retrieve them. Why leave such treasures for other dogs? "I have news for you," Mr. Banks exclaimed as Mrs. Banks met him at the door. "The sensation of the year, my dear. Looty is no longer with us, and Miss Andrew has left next door and gone to live with Binnacle." Mrs. Banks gave an astounded shriek and collapsed upon a chair. "Looty lost? Oh, the poor dear child. Shouldn't we go and look for him, so young in a strange land?" "Oh, Looty has a good head on his shoulders. He's probably made his way to the docks and stowed away with some trading ship. It's Miss Andrew I'm thinking about. She kept the boy like a bird in a cage, and now she's a bird in a cage herself, reading stories from Fizzo." "Fizzo? Miss Andrew? I can't believe it." It was Mrs. Banks' turn to be flabbergasted. Mr. Banks was almost dancing with joy. He was thinking that now his astronomer would soon be in his old house again, his telescope turned to the sky. He did not yet know that next door's invisible dwellers were already back in their places. The grandmother, the chess companions, Admiral Boom's brave sea captain, Mrs. Boom's quiet child, Mrs. Banks' friendly friend, the sleeping beauty, Gobbo. Nor did he realize that even the nettles had begun to sprout in the garden again. "Think of it!" he cried with delight. "Number 18 empty again, and with luck we'll keep it so." "But, George, shouldn't we think of Miss Andrew? Will she be able to endure such a life?" "No, my dear, I'm sure she won't. It's my belief that Binnacle will wake up one morning and find himself deserted. No one to read aloud to him. Miss Andrew, as we know, has a mind of her own. She's a learnt woman and a born teacher. She'll skip off somewhere, I'll be bound. Last time it was to the south. Perhaps she'll make her way northwards and find an Eskimo, heaven help him. You mark my words, the lane will have seen the last of her sooner than you think." "Well, I hope so," murmured Mrs. Banks. "We have had enough of that terrible snoring, Michael." "Michael!" she broke off at the sight of a figure in pajamas perched on the banisters. You ought to be in bed. And what do you think you're doing? Asked his father. Trying to climb up the banisters? I'm being a pirate, Michael panted, attempting to pull himself higher. Well, no one, not even a pirate, can climb up banisters. It's against the laws of nature. And by the way, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Looty has gone away. We won't be seeing him again, I'm afraid. I know, said Michael, knowing too, though he did not say so, that someone had climbed the banisters. Someone, in fact, who was not far away. Really? Said Mr. Banks testily. I can't think how it so often happens that my children seem to know what's afoot before I get a hint of it. But be off with you, on your 2 feet like any civilized being. Michael went unwillingly. He did not like being civilized. At the top of the stairs, Mary Poppins was waiting, a blue-clad statue with an arm outstretched that pointed to his bed. Oh, not again, please, Mary Poppins. I'm tired of going to bed every night. The night is for sleeping, she said primly. So, in with you, Spitspot, and you too, if you please, Jane. For Jane, holding Ludy's coconut, was kneeling on the window seat, watching the full moon sailing the sky low down on the horizon. There was somebody there, though she could not see him, for whom no night was for sleeping. And I'll take care of that, thank you. Mary Poppins took the coconut and glanced at the carved smiling face that seemed to repeat the wordlessly Ludy's phrase of peace and blessings. She placed it on the mantelpiece, and as she did so, her image looked at her from the mirror, and the two exchanged a nod of approval. But I wanted to watch and wake, grumbled Michael. To his surprise, Mary Poppins said nothing. She merely placed a chair by his bed and with a wide dramatic gesture invited him to sit down. He did so, full of determination. He too would see Ludy on his way. But soon his eyes began to close. He propped them open with his fingers, but then he yawned an enormous yawn that seemed to swallow him up. I'd better do it tomorrow, he said, and rolled sideways into the bed with Mary Poppins, with a look that said more than words was turning down for him. Tomorrow never comes, said Jane. When you wake up, it's always today, and she too climbed into bed. They lay there, watching Mary Poppins making her usual whirlwind round, tucking in Annabelle and the twins, pushing the rocking horse into his corner, taking things out of pockets, folding up clothes. As she came close to Michael's sailor blouse, she tossed the mouth organ to him. He decided to give it another try, blowing in and blowing out, but again the mouth organ was silent. It still won't work for me, he said, and it wouldn't for the man in the moon. I wonder, Mary Poppins, why it worked for you when you played the sailor's hornpipe. She favored him with a quick blue glance. I wonder, she said mockingly, and went on being a whirlwind. Jane too would have liked to watch and wake, but she knew that she could not do it. So she lay still, thinking of Ludy, picturing the singing, leaping figure, wrapped in the scarf of woolen roses, careering across the sky. For Ludy too, the night was not for sleeping, and suddenly she was anxious. Suppose, Mary Poppins, she burst out, suppose there are enough clouds up there to take him all the way. There are not enough clouds up there to take him all the way. She remembered many a clear, bright night when from corner to corner of the world there was nothing but a dark blue sky. What if he came to an empty space? How could he go further? There's always a cloud about somewhere, said Mary Poppins comfortably, and she set a match to the wick of the nightlight where it stood on the mantelpiece, a small and glowing likeness of the big lamp on the table. As usual, it would watch all night, and the 2 lamps filled the room with shadows and were themselves like clouds. Jane felt reassured. When the morning comes, you will be at home, under the coconut palms, and we too will be at home, but under cherry trees. It's different, but somehow the same. East, west, home's best, said Mary Poppins cheerfully, as she hung the parrot-headed umbrella on its accustomed hook. And you, Mary Poppins? Jane demanded, knowing that it was a daring question. Where is your home, east or west? Where do you go when you're not here? Everyone needs his own home. That's what you said today, remember? Michael, too, was daring. Mary Poppins stood by the table, a whirlwind no longer, her day's work over. The glow from the big lamp lit her face, the pink cheeks, the blue eyes, the turned-up nose. She looked at them both reflectively. Well, they waited, hardly breathing. Where did she come from? Woodland or field, cottage or castle, mountain or sea? Would she or wouldn't she tell them? Oh, she would, they thought, for her face was so vivid, so brimful of things that remained to be told. Then a sparkle leapt to the blue eyes, and the old familiar smile greeted their eager faces. I am at home, she said, wherever I am. And with that, she turned out the lamp. And that is the end.